Located in an island country of the southwestern Pacific Ocean, New Zealand is definitely a place that is rich with culture and tradition. From its beautiful yet serene panoramic view, there are various cultures that makes New Zealand as a whole. One of them are the Maori culture. They are one of the oldest culture that they are in the world since they are voyagers in the old days and they decided to set their sail in the southwestern Pacific island, which is New Zealand. This culture originates from the east of Polynesia, and till this day this culture still has this distinct influence from Polynesia with mixture of this modern day's culture. They set their own distinct language, mythology, crafts and arts, and this is why this culture is very compact with tradition.
Okay, let's talk about Kakahu Maori, that means Maori Aotearoa. Firstly, Maori people is famous with their weaving skills. Majority of the Maori people know how to weave. Aitia ti waina o ti paha rekeke is a Maori proverb that translates to mean marry the woman who is always at the flatbush, for she is an expert flight worker and an industrial person. So, we're not going to talk about their weaving skill, but we want to talk about their uniqueness in making their clothes. As well as protecting against the rain and cold, traditional Maori garments were used to protect modesty and to show the wearer's status. Basically, their clothes are made from the animals, plants, and natural fibers such as leaves, rocks, shells, animal skins, and so on. Look, we can conclude that Maori people actually are creative people. However, different material of the clothes are made, that means there are different status for them. For example, the most special clothes were worn only by chiefs. This included cloaks made of kuri skin and hair, full feather cloaks, and kaitaka, which are made of finely woven flax fiber. Raincaps were shorter than cloaks and kept the wearer dry. They were usually made from flax or cabbage tree leaves. In the 2000s, raincaps were sometimes worn by waka canoe paddlers. Maori generally walk barefoot, but sometimes made sandals from flax, cabbage tree leaf, or mountain grass for crossing rocky ground. Hairstyle could show someone's status or indicate when someone was in mourning. Men's hair was twisted or knot into many different kinds of top knots, which might indicate where the wearer came from. There is less information about women's hairstyle, but stories record that chiefly women or women about to sacrifice themselves often dress their hair. Because the head was considered as the most tapu, which is sacred part of the body, the hair of a high-ranking person could only be dressed by someone of even higher status. Decorative comb of red clay and oil extract from plants were used to dress hair. Decorative combs made of bone, stone, or wood were traditionally worn only by men of high status. Stuff were later adopted by women. Feathers were commonly used in headdresses. Sometimes, the entire tail of hoia might be worn. Necklaces and pendants were made from stone and bone. Heitiki are neck pendants carved into a human-like form. Some pendants were perfumed with aromatic gums or oils.
Next one is Hakka. There is not really a translation per se, but the word itself can be found in other Polynesian culture, meaning dance. Yet, there is one common legend, Maori legend, and it is of the sun god. The sun god and his wife had a son, and during the Hakka performance with their hands quivering, it actually represents the sun's dance for his mother, as it made the air seem to dance and quiver on hot days. The first type of Hakka is Hakka Peru Peru. It is performed by men before they go to war, and they perform it with aggressive expressions like the eyes bulging, tongue sticking out, feet stomping. And they do it with the purpose to intimidate their opponents. The second type of haka is Ngeri haka, has a different purpose, which is to motivate both performers and warriors, and they're performing without any weapons, and the movements are much more freer. Like a modern haka, it can be performed in celebratory events like weddings and birthdays. The third type of haka is Manawa Wera haka. It is usually performed at funerals, and no weapons are used also, and movements are freer. They can perform hakas to call out injustice that has been done towards the society, towards the community. In general, anyone can perform their hakas long as it is done with respect and not out of mockery. This is because haka defines their identity as a culture, as a tribe.
The Maorians have a form of body art known as moko, but more commonly referred to as Maori tattooing. The art form was brought to the Maori from Polynesia and is considered highly sacred. Since the Maori people consider the head to be the most sacred part of the body, the most popular kind of Maori tattoo was facial tattoo, which was composed of curved shapes and spiral-like patterns. Often this tattoo covered the whole face and was a symbol of rank, social status, power and prestige. For Maori, tattooing was a rite of passage, which meant it was highly revered and ritualized. The tattooing would begin usually during adolescence. The great thing about Maori tattoos is that to this day, no two tattoos are alike. Maori tattoos are one of a kind. They are always highly intricate and detailed and display the craftsmanship and artistry of not only the artist but of the Maori culture. The Maori tattoo artist is called the Tohunga Ta Moko, which means Moko specialist. These tattooists are highly respected and considered tapu, which means inviolable or holy. Having a Maori tattoo applied was a very painful experience. First, deep cuts were incised into the skin and then the chisel was dipped into the pigment and tapped into the cuts. Another variation of this process involved dipping the chisel into the jar of pigment and inserting it into the skin by striking the end with a mallet. This manner of tattooing leaves the skin with grooves after healing instead of the usual smooth surface left after needlepoint tattoos. Maori tattoo was once a long and labor-intensive process, but it was very painful. Only for a few body parts of the body were tattooed at a time to allow healing. There are two designs for the Maori tattoos. The normal design only involved the blackening of the lines, whilst the second called for blackening the background and leaving the lines clear. This was called puhoro. Due to the sacred nature of the Maori tattoo, those who were undergoing the process and those involved in the process could not eat with their hands or talk to anyone aside from the other people being tattooed. Those who were receiving tattoos made it a point to not cry out in pain.
Maori religion is based on polytheism, which means that they believe in more than one god, or as they call them as Atua. Some examples of Atuas are Ranginui, the father of the sky, and also Tane, the gods of forest and bird. Certain people and objects contain mana, which is a spiritual power or essence. Tribal members of a higher rank would not touch objects which belong to members of a lower rank. This was considered a pollution, and persons of a lower rank could not touch the belonging of a high-born person without putting themselves at the risk of being killed. Tapu, in the other hand, can be interpreted as sacred. A person, object, or place which is tapu, may not be touched by human contact, or in some cases may not even be approached. So, something that is tapu is something that have a high amount of mana. In early times, food cooked for a person of high rank was tapu. A chief's house was tapu, and even the chief could not eat food in the interior of his house. Burial grounds was always tapu and often surrounded by protective fences. During the 19th century, many Maori practiced Christianity. They did this as a justification in opposing the British. This is because, even though they had followed their religion, the British still colonized their territory.
Every culture must have its traditional foods. Maori also have several traditional foods that they eat from their ancient times till now. First of all is the inaga. Inaga is whitebait. Whitebait is a small freshwater fish that are plentiful in spring because that is when they run upstream. Piko piko is fern shoots. Only 7 out of around 200 species of New Zealand fern are edible. Piko piko tastes like asparagus. They also eat other types of fern such as moku, which is commonly known as hen and chicken fern, and huru huru wena. Karaka berries is one of their famous food because it is originally poison, but they made a way to eat it without the poison. Karengo. Karengo is sometimes known as parengo. It is a seaweed that has various uses to it. They are used for eating, medicine, and also as a storage container or a steamy vessel for fish and other seafoods. Last on their list is fungi. Maori knew many varieties of edible fungus, including harore, hakka, and pukurau. Harore is wood-leaf mushrooms, hakka is wood ear, and pukurau is puffballs. While the other fungi can be found throughout the year, haroro grow in a very specific, moist, humid environment. They appear only for a short time each year, but in large quantities. The next part is cooking. Maori never cook in the same buildings. Instead, kai, which means food, was prepared in the open air or in special cooking shacks. The most common method for their cooking is hangi, or the earth oven. The way they done it is by using hot rocks and water to create steam in a shallow pit, and they dug it into the earth. Since Maori did not make pottery, their only means of boiling food was to place a red hot stone. Marakrai is a traditional fermentation process for food. The foods are then stored in pataka, storehouses, and also ruang kumara, which is underground pits.